I fell off the bus. The rain swallowed me whole. A stranger's hand caught mine before the pavement did. She didn't ask my name first. She asked if I was breathing. Something about her voice made me believe her. I was supposed to marry a man that spring. My mother had already picked the flowers. I hadn't picked anything yet. The stranger's eyes were the color of wet concrete, steady and unbothered by the storm. I couldn't stop staring. "You're bleeding," she said, kneeling in the gutter beside me. I didn't feel the cut until she pointed at it. I would spend the next 8 months trying to forget that face. I never once succeeded. By winter, everything I thought I wanted would be gone, and I would finally understand why. But first, you should know how ordinary that Tuesday morning was supposed to be. My name is Maya Whitfield, 29 years old, a junior architect living in a city that never quite felt like mine. I grew up believing love followed a script I never wrote. Millbrook, Ohio, is the kind of town where everyone knows your business before you do. My mother, Carol, kept a calendar of other people's weddings taped inside her pantry door. I moved to Chicago at 22 to study buildings, structures, things that made sense on paper. I never expected the thing that would actually collapse to be me. That rainy Tuesday, I was late for a client meeting, balancing a laptop bag and a coffee I never got to drink. When the bus lurched and the world went sideways, I remember the puddle rushing up to meet my face, the cold shock of it, and then a hand that didn't hesitate, gripping my wrist like she'd done this 100 times. "On 3, she said. And before I could argue, she'd already pulled me upright, steadying me against her shoulder like I weighed nothing at all. Her name was Sloan Reyes. She said it while wringing rainwater out of my sleeve, like introductions were the least important part of the morning. She worked the overnight shift at Northwestern Memorial, an ER nurse still in scrubs, headed home to sleep when she saw me go down. She almost kept walking. She didn't. "You should get that knee looked at," she said, nodding at the tear in my tights, blood blooming faintly beneath it. I told her I was fine. I was not fine. She insisted on walking me 2 blocks to a diner, out of the rain, and ordering me tea I didn't ask for. I let her. Mostly because I didn't want her to leave. We sat across from each other for 40 minutes, strangers who had nowhere else to be. And I found myself laughing harder than I had in months at her tired jokes. When she finally stood to leave, she wrote her number on a napkin without asking if I wanted it. "In case you fall again," she said. And I believed her completely. I didn't call that night. I told myself it was inappropriate, that I was engaged, that women did not do this. I stared at the napkin until 2 in the morning. My fiancé, Derek, called to ask why I sounded distracted. I told him I'd had a rough commute. I didn't mention the woman who'd pulled me out of a puddle. 3 days later, I texted Sloan a single line, "Thank you for not walking past me." She responded in under a minute. I read her reply 7 times before sleeping. We started meeting for coffee, always with an excuse: my knee needed checking. I wanted to return her umbrella. Small lies stacked on top of each other like bricks. I noticed things about her I had no business noticing. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she remembered my coffee order after one visit. I told myself this was friendship. Women could be close without it meaning anything. I had never once needed to convince myself of that with any other friend. Derek proposed to me at 26. In front of both our families, with a ring his grandmother had worn. I said yes because saying no felt impossible in that room. My mother cried when I told her about the engagement, the good kind of crying, the kind she'd been saving up for years. I hadn't cried at all. I noticed that too. Sloan and I started walking along the lakefront on her days off. No excuses left to hide behind. We talked about everything except the thing growing quietly between us. She told me about growing up in Detroit, the daughter of a factory worker, the first in her family to leave the state. I told her things I'd never told Derek. One evening she reached over and fixed my scarf. tucking it closer against the wind, and her fingers brushed my collarbone. Neither of us moved for a full second too long. I went home that night and sat on my bathroom floor, staring at my engagement ring, trying to name the feeling in my chest. I already knew its name. I refused it. My best friend, Priya, noticed I'd started smiling at my phone. "New office friend?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. I said yes and changed the subject immediately. Sloane never pushed. She let silences sit between us without filling them, which somehow made them louder than any words could have been. On my 30th almost birthday, she showed up at my apartment with a badly wrapped cactus, said she'd heard I killed every plant I owned, and this one couldn't be killed easily. We stood in my kitchen laughing about the cactus until the laughing stopped and neither of us said anything, and the air between us felt like it was holding its breath. "I should go," she said, not moving. "You should," I agreed, not moving either. It was Derek's ringtone that finally broke whatever was about to happen. I answered the phone in front of her, my voice too bright, and watched something close behind Sloane's eyes before she quietly let herself out. She didn't text for 4 days. I refreshed my phone so often my thumb ached. I finally understood what people meant when they said absence was its own kind of proof. When she finally called, it was to apologize for pulling away. "I forgot my place," she said. I told her she'd never had a place to forget. I meant it completely. We met at a bar near her hospital, and 2 drinks in, she asked me directly if I was happy with Derek. No one had asked me that in 3 years. I opened my mouth to say yes automatically. What came out instead was silence, long enough that she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "You don't have to answer that," she said softly. "I think you just did," I whispered back. And for the first time I let myself really look at her. She leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. When our lips finally met, it felt less like a beginning and more like something I'd forgotten I already knew. I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the wheel, terrified and more certain of anything than I had ever been in my entire adult life. I broke off my engagement to Derek 11 days later, in a coffee shop, with words I'd rehearsed 100 times and still couldn't say cleanly. He asked if there was someone else. I told him there was someone I was finally allowing myself to be. He didn't understand. I wasn't sure I fully did either yet. My mother called the moment she heard, hysterical, asking what had happened, what she'd done wrong, as if my life were a house she'd built incorrectly. I told her I needed time to figure things out. I did not tell her the truth. I was still practicing saying it to my own reflection. Sloane and I kept our relationship quiet at first, meeting in her apartment, in mine, in the small pockets of the city where no one from my old life would look. I had never felt so entirely seen by another person. She noticed when I was anxious before I said a word, and she never once asked me to be smaller. We spent a Sunday cooking together, flour on both our faces, and I realized I hadn't thought about what anyone else expected of me in nearly 6 hours. Felt like flying. She told me, quietly, over dishes, that she'd been divorced once, from a man, back in Detroit. "I spent 4 years figuring out who I actually was," she said. I understood that completely now. I asked her if it scared her, being with a woman who was still figuring herself out. "A little," she admitted. "But I'd rather be scared with you than certain without you." Priya finally guessed the truth after catching us laughing together at a bar downtown, our fingers loosely laced under the table. She didn't flinch. She just smiled and said, "Finally." Having one person know felt like setting down a suitcase I hadn't realized I was carrying. I slept better that night than I had in years. Sloane took me to meet her mother in Detroit, a warm woman who hugged me twice before learning my last name. "Any woman who makes my daughter smile like that is family," she said. I cried in the car afterward, not from sadness, but because I had never once imagined a mother's love could be handed out that easily, without conditions attached. My own mother kept asking when I would bring the new friend home for Sunday dinner. I kept inventing reasons to delay it. Every excuse felt heavier than the last. Sloane never asked me to come out before I was ready. But I watched her hesitate. Once, before reaching for my hand in public. And it broke something open in my chest. "I don't want you hiding for me," she said one night. "I want you hiding for you. If you have to. Just don't pretend it doesn't cost you something." I started therapy that spring. Mostly to untangle who I was from who Millbrook had raised me to be. It was slower work than I expected. And lonelier some days. My father called out of nowhere one evening. Asked simple questions about my job. My apartment. Nothing about my personal life. I realized he was giving me room. I appreciated it more than he knew. My brother, Tyler, 3 years younger and far less afraid of our mother, told me over the phone that he guessed months ago. "You laugh different now," he said. "Good different." Sloane and I moved in together after 8 months, mostly because neither of us wanted to spend another night apart if we didn't have to. We built a small, ordinary life: grocery runs, Sunday crosswords, arguments about whose turn it was to do dishes. I had never known ordinary could feel like this much of a gift. At work, I kept things vague, referring to my partner without a name or a gender attached. My manager never asked further. But the vagueness itself was exhausting to maintain. A coworker named Renee started noticing the framed photo on my desk. 2 women laughing on a beach. And her questions grew sharper each time she passed my office. "Is that your sister?" she asked once. Too pointedly to be innocent. I said no. She didn't ask again. But something in her expression had already shifted toward me. I told Sloane about Renee's comment that night. She squeezed my hand and said nothing needed to change unless I wanted it to. I appreciated that she never rushed me. My mother finally set a date for the family dinner she'd been requesting for months. I agreed. Terrified. Telling myself I would introduce Sloane simply as my roommate. Buying more time. Sloane agreed to the plan without complaint, though I saw the flicker of hurt behind her eyes before she covered it with a small, understanding smile. The drive to Millbrook took 4 hours, most of them silent. My hands sweating on the wheel the closer we got to the house I grew up in. My mother greeted us at the door, hugging me first, then extending a polite hand to Sloane, calling her Maya's friend before either of us said a word. Dinner was tense in ways only my mother's cooking could disguise. She asked Sloane where she was from, what her family did. Careful questions with careful distance behind them. My father, quieter than usual, kept glancing between Sloane and me with something unreadable in his expression, like a man slowly solving a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted solved. After dinner, Tyler pulled me aside in the kitchen and whispered, "You don't have to keep doing this. You know. Lying gets heavier the longer you carry it." I didn't answer him. I was too busy watching my mother through the doorway, watching the way she kept her distance from Sloane like she might catch something contagious. Sloane excused herself early to use the bathroom, and I found her a few minutes later sitting on the stairs, jaw tight, blinking too fast to be casual. "I can't keep being your roommate," she said quietly. "I love you, Maya. I'm not ashamed of that. I just don't know how much longer I can watch you be." Her words landed like a struck bell, ringing long after she'd said them. I didn't have an answer ready. I hated that I didn't have an answer ready. We drove back to Chicago mostly in silence, the 4 hours stretching longer than the ones on the way there. I kept glancing at her, unsure how to close the distance. That week, work got harder. Renee had apparently mentioned the beach photo to 2 other coworkers, and the whispers in the break room grew a little too quiet whenever I walked in. My manager called me into her office, gently, to ask if everything was all right at home, in a tone that suggested she already suspected more than she was saying. I lied again. Reflexively. The way I'd been trained to for years. I hated the taste of the lie the moment it left my mouth. That night, cleaning out a box of things from my childhood bedroom my mother had shipped me, I found a stack of old letters tucked inside a hymnal that had belonged to my grandmother. The letters were addressed to a woman named Eleanor, dated 1962, written in my grandmother's careful handwriting, full of longing she'd apparently never once acted on. I have decided love like ours does not survive in daylight, one letter read. So I will keep you folded here, where no one else can touch what we had. My grandmother had married my grandfather 2 years after that letter was written. She died when I was 12, and I never once suspected the life she'd quietly buried. I sat on my bedroom floor for an hour, holding 70-year-old paper, understanding for the first time exactly what my mother's family had trained generations of women to swallow. I called my mother the next morning and asked, carefully, if she'd known about Eleanor. There was a long silence before she said, I found those letters when I was 17. I never told anyone, she admitted, her voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't. Some days. That conversation cracked something open between us. Not resolved, but no longer entirely closed either. I hung up feeling lighter and heavier at once. I showed Sloane the letters that night. She read them twice, then looked up at me with tears she didn't bother hiding. I don't want to be your family's secret, she said. I don't want that either, I told her, and meant it more fiercely than I'd meant almost anything. I'm just scared of what happens after I stop hiding you. Being scared is allowed, she said. Making me invisible isn't. I didn't have a response for that. I only had the truth, and I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Renee approached me directly the following week, closing my office door behind her. I know what I saw in that photo, she said. I just want to know if you're okay. I braced for judgment that never came. Instead, she told me, quietly, that her own brother had come out at 20, and their family still hadn't fully recovered from how badly they'd handled it. I'm not trying to out you, she said. I just don't want you carrying this alone at work if you don't have to. I hadn't expected an ally where I'd feared an enemy. Renee's kindness didn't erase the whispers entirely, but it gave me one steady person at work who knew. And somehow that made the office feel less like a minefield. Sloane got a job offer that same week. A lead nursing position at a hospital in Seattle, double her current salary, with better hours and less overnight rotation. She didn't tell me about it for 3 days. I found the offer letter by accident, folded inside her coat pocket while looking for her keys. When were you going to tell me? Asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I hadn't decided if I was taking it, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. That's not what I asked, I pressed. She finally admitted she'd been afraid that telling me would force a conversation about whether I'd ever be ready to build a real life with her. I don't know how to keep loving someone who keeps me folded in a drawer, she said, echoing my grandmother's letter without knowing it. The words hit harder because of that. We argued that night. Not loudly, but with the exhausted honesty of two people who had been circling the same wound for months without naming it. I'm not ashamed of you, I told her. I'm ashamed of how my family might treat you. And I don't know how to protect you from that yet. I don't need protecting, she said. I need choosing. Out loud. In front of the people who matter to you. I had no argument left against that. She told me she'd give her answer on the Seattle offer in 2 weeks. She didn't say it as an ultimatum, but I heard it as one anyway. I barely slept that week, replaying every version of a future where I lost her because I was too afraid to say her name at my mother's table. My father called me unexpectedly, asking to meet for coffee alone. No explanation given. I assumed the worst the entire drive to Millbrook. He was quiet for a long time after I sat down, stirring sugar into coffee he didn't drink. Your grandmother wrote letters, he finally said. Your mother told me last week. I hadn't expected him to know. I loved your grandmother, he said, but I always wondered what she gave up to become the woman I knew. I don't want that for you. I like Sloane, he added, almost shyly. I liked her the moment she asked about my woodworking instead of pretending to care. I just didn't know if it was my place to say so. I cried in that diner booth. The same kind of diner where Sloane had first bought me tea. My father reached across the table and simply held my hand. Your mother loves you more than her fear, he said. She just hasn't learned how to prove that yet. Maybe you have to show her how. I drove home with a fragile kind of hope, the first real one I'd allowed myself in months. I called Sloane before I even reached the highway. I want to tell my family the truth, I said. Really tell them. Not roommate. Not friend. You. Us. There was a long pause before she answered. Her voice thick. I'm not taking the Seattle job unless we're doing this as a real choice, she said. Not out of guilt. Out of wanting the same life. I told her I wanted exactly that. I scheduled a family dinner myself this time. My own invitation instead of my mother's summons. I told her directly on the phone that I had something important to say in person. She sounded nervous but didn't push for details. Bring Sloane, she said, quietly, before hanging up. It was the first time she'd said her name unprompted. The 4-hour drive back to Millbrook felt entirely different this time. Sloane's hand resting on my knee the whole way. Both of us quiet with nerves and something like hope. My mother had set the table with the good china. The kind reserved for holidays and guests she was trying to impress. I noticed. It meant something. Tyler winked at me from across the table before dinner even started. Like he already knew what was coming and had been waiting for it for months. Partway through dinner, my mother set down her fork and said, Whatever you came here to tell us, Maya. I think we're ready to hear it now. My hands shook under the table. Sloane found my fingers and held them, grounding me the way she had on that rainy sidewalk over a year before. Sloane isn't my roommate, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She's my partner. I love her. I have for a long time. And I'm done pretending otherwise. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it was probably only seconds. My mother's eyes filled with tears before she'd said a single word. I know, she finally said. I've known since Sunday dinner last spring. I just didn't know how to be brave enough to ask. Her admission stunned the entire table. I found Eleanor's letters when I was 17, she continued. And I spent 30 years terrified that loving a woman would break our family the way I imagined it broke hers. It didn't break her, my father said gently. Silence did. Don't let it break this one too. My mother nodded, wiping her eyes with her napkin. I don't fully understand everything, my mother admitted, turning to Sloane. But I understand that my daughter looks happier than I've ever seen her. That has to count for something. Sloane thanked her, voice thick with emotion, and for the first time all evening, my mother reached across the table and touched Sloane's hand herself, without being prompted. We stayed at the table for 2 more hours, talking honestly for what felt like the first time in my entire life within those walls. Driving home that night, Sloane cried quietly in the passenger seat, relief and disbelief tangled together. I didn't think it would go like that, she admitted. Neither did I said, reaching for her hand at a red light. I think we've both been bracing for a storm that finally decided not to come. Word spread slowly through Millbrook the way it always did. Some relatives warmer than others. A few aunts noticeably cooler at the next family gathering. My mother, surprisingly, became the one correcting people who misgendered Sloane or called her Maya's friend, instead of her partner. Watching her defend us fiercely undid something old in my chest. Sloane accepted the Seattle offer 2 weeks later, but only after we'd both agreed we were building the move together, as partners choosing a life, not one person following another out of fear. We spent a full weekend packing our Chicago apartment, taping boxes, arguing gently over which mugs to keep, both of us laughing more than either expected during something so exhausting. Renee threw me a small goodbye lunch at work. Just the 2 of us. and told me she was proud of how far I'd come since that awkward photo question. "You gave people room to be kind," she said. "Some of us just needed permission." I hadn't realized my own honesty could open doors for someone else's. The night before our move, I drove to the cemetery outside Millbrook alone, and stood at my grandmother's grave for the first time in years. Letters folded in my coat pocket. "I found Eleanor," I told her headstone quietly. "I'm sorry you never got the chance I'm getting. I promise I won't fold myself away the way you had to." I left one of the letters there, weighted down with a small stone. A strange kind of return, giving her secret back to the earth that had kept it safe. Sloane found me there an hour later, having guessed exactly where I'd gone. She didn't ask questions. She just wrapped her arms around me from behind and let me cry. "She'd be proud of you," Sloane said softly. Even if she never got to say it herself, I believed her completely. The way I'd learned to believe most things she told me. The drive to Seattle took 3 days. The two of us trading playlists and gas station snacks, watching the country change outside the windows mile by mile. We stopped in Wyoming to watch the sunset over open plains neither of us had ever seen before. And Sloane turned to me and said, "This feels like our real beginning." I laughed and told her our real beginning had actually been a rainy Chicago sidewalk, Puddle, and a stranger who refused to keep walking. She agreed, smiling. Our new apartment in Seattle overlooked a small green park instead of a busy street, and the quiet of it felt like an exhale we'd both been holding for years. Sloane started her new position within a week, and I found remote architecture work that let me build my career without leaving the life we just built together. My mother called every Sunday now, a new ritual neither of us had expected, asking real questions about Sloane, about our apartment, about the life I was actually living. 6 months in, Renee texted to say she'd finally told her own family she was bisexual, crediting our conversations at work for giving her the courage to say it out loud. I sat with that message for a long time, realizing that my own small act of honesty had rippled outward further than I ever could have predicted. Sloane's mother visited us for a week that spring, filling our small kitchen with the smell of her cooking and stories about Sloane as a stubborn, fearless child. "She was always like this," her mother told me one night, nodding toward Sloane. "Never waited for permission to help someone. Glad she finally found someone worth staying still for." I thought about that constantly, how the same instinct that made her stop for a stranger in the rain was the same instinct that had made her fight for us. One evening, cleaning out an old box during our unpacking, I found the original napkin, faded and soft. Sloane's phone number still barely legible in blue ink. I showed it to her, and she laughed until she cried, insisting she'd written her number crooked because her hands had been shaking the entire time, nervous despite her calm exterior that day. "You seem so put together," I said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I almost didn't stop. I told myself someone else would help you." I'm glad I didn't listen to that voice. We framed the napkin eventually, hanging it in our hallway beside the beach photo that had started so much trouble at my old office months before. My father visited alone that summer, without my mother, wanting time with just Sloane and me. He spent an entire afternoon in our small garage, teaching Sloane basic woodworking. "Your grandmother would have loved watching this," he told me quietly, while Sloane sanded a small wooden box in the corner, focused and content. "She would have loved this whole life." I asked him, gently, if he ever resented how long it took our family to get here. He shook his head. "Better late and honest than early and hollow," he said. Tyler moved to Seattle himself that fall for a job opportunity, and suddenly our tiny apartment became the center of impromptu family dinners neither of us had planned for. Watching my brother and Sloane argue playfully over board game rules at our kitchen table, I realized how completely ordinary my extraordinary life had finally become. My mother flew out for Thanksgiving that year. Her first time meeting Sloane's mother in person, the two of them bonding instantly over stories of raising strong-willed daughters. Watching them laugh together in our kitchen, Two women who had once represented my greatest fear. I understood that the family I'd been terrified of losing had simply grown larger. That night, after everyone left, Sloan and I sat on our back porch under a blanket, watching the last of the Seattle rain clear into stars. I keep waiting for the twist, she admitted quietly. For something to go wrong. The way things always seem to eventually. I understood the fear completely. I carried it too. Maybe the twist already happened, I told her. Maybe it was you stopping for a stranger who didn't even know she needed saving yet. She turned to look at me then. Rain-damp hair. Tired eyes. The same steady gaze she'd given me on that Chicago sidewalk over 2 years earlier. I love you, she said. Simply. Like it was the easiest sentence she'd ever spoken. No fear left behind it at all. I love you too, I answered. And for the first time in my life, the words didn't feel like a confession. They felt like a fact I was finally allowed to state. We got engaged that winter. Quietly. On the same porch. No elaborate plan. Just 2 rings we'd picked out together. Chosen without a script either of us had inherited. My mother cried again when I called her this time. But it was the good kind of crying now. The kind she'd once saved only for weddings she understood. I'm going to do this one right, she said. Whatever you need me to be for this wedding. I'll learn it. I believed her. And for once, that belief didn't scare me. We planned a small backyard wedding for the following June. String lights and folding chairs. Nothing my mother's old calendar could have predicted or prepared for. Renee flew out for the wedding, insisting she wouldn't miss the chance to see Office Beach photo girl finally get her happy ending in real life. My father walked me down a short garden aisle, his hand steady around mine. No hesitation left in either of us by the time we reached the end. My mother sat in the front row beside Sloane's mother, both women dabbing their eyes with the same tissue box, passing it back and forth without a word. Tyler stood as my witness, grinning the entire ceremony, occasionally mouthing finally, whenever our eyes met across the small gathered crowd. Sloane wore her grandmother's old brooch, pinned quietly to her dress, a small tribute to family members who hadn't lived to see this kind of freedom firsthand. I carried one of Eleanor's letters folded inside my bouquet, a secret only Sloane knew about, a quiet way of bringing my grandmother's unlived love into the daylight at last. When it came time for vows, I told Sloane that she hadn't just caught me on a sidewalk that rainy morning. She had caught the entire rest of my life. She told me that stopping for me had been the easiest decision she'd ever made, and staying had been the best one, chosen again every single day since. We kissed as the small crowd cheered, string lights flickering to life overhead just as the sky darkened, timed so perfectly it felt like the universe had finally cooperated. At the reception, my mother gave a short, unscripted toast, admitting to the whole gathered family that she once believed love like ours couldn't survive in daylight. I was wrong, she said. My mother taught me to fold love away to keep it safe, she continued. My daughter taught me that love only survives when you finally let it breathe. The whole yard went quiet, then erupted into applause. My mother wiping her eyes as my father pulled her into a hug beside the makeshift dance floor. Later that night, dancing slowly with Sloane under the string lights, I thought about the version of me who once sat frozen on a bathroom floor, afraid of her own reflection. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone I understood with compassion but no longer recognized in the mirror. Someone who had needed time, not judgment, to become who I was. Renee found me near the dessert table and hugged me tightly. You have no idea how many people you gave permission to, she said. I told her the permission had gone both ways. My father found me during the last song of the night, asking for one dance, the way he promised he would since I was a little girl. Your grandmother's letters didn't disappear for nothing, he said quietly as we swayed. They waited for someone brave enough to finally answer them. I'm glad it was you. I thought of Eleanor then, a woman I'd never met, whose unlived love had somehow traveled 70 years to help set mine free. Sloane pulled me back into her arms as the night wound down, both of us barefoot on the grass. Exhausted and impossibly happy in equal measure. Any regrets? She teased, resting her forehead against mine. Only that I didn't fall off that bus sooner. I laughed. And she kissed me before I could say anything else. We built our life slowly after that. Unremarkable in the best possible way. Full of ordinary Tuesdays that no longer felt like anything to hide. 2 years later, my mother helped us paint a nursery in soft yellow, insisting she'd earned the right to spoil a grandchild who would never have to hide the way I once did. Eleanor's remaining letters now live in a small wooden box Sloane's father-in-law helped me build. Kept not in secrecy this time, but in honor. Passed openly through our family. Renee still texts every year on the anniversary of that rainy Chicago sidewalk, calling it the day the beach photo finally made sense. I always smile at that message. My mother once told me she keeps a new calendar now. Not of other people's weddings, but of the small victories our family has earned by finally choosing honesty over fear. I think of my grandmother often, standing where she once stood, except allowed to stay standing there instead of quietly walking away from herself. Sloane still works overnight shifts sometimes, and I still wait up for her. Remembering the first night a stranger chose to stop instead of walking past someone in the rain. Some nights we sit on our porch and read Eleanor's letters aloud together, giving her unlived words a voice they never got the chance to have in her own lifetime. I no longer flinch when someone asks about my wife. The word used to feel dangerous in my mouth. Now it simply feels true. Falling off that bus was the worst moment of an ordinary Tuesday. It became the first sentence of the truest chapter of my entire life. She was the only one who stopped. I have spent every day since grateful that some people simply refused to keep walking. Then